Hi all. So we're still waiting for Charlie to join us. We're having some technical difficulties this morning, as is always the case, especially when you have people who claim to know about technology. But in the meantime, me and Dominic will start the conversation, and hopefully Charlie will be joining us any minute. So welcome to this Communicate 2021 session on using audio effectively. I'm Lisa Marley. I'm the creator and host of the Crimes Against Nature podcast, and I've also recently joined the Off the Leash podcast's team, along with Dominic Dyer and Charlie Moores, who will be the other speakers today. So Off the Leash is a weekly podcast from environmental and animal welfare campaigners where Charlie and Dominic raise the inconvenient truths, hold the decision makers to account, and generate enough anger and concern to get us all off our sofas and standing up for the planet that we call home. Today we're going to be speaking about the tools and techniques for creating effective audio content and our mission to create a platform that makes audio an accessible conservation tool. This is an interactive session, so please say hi to us, use the Q&A function. There's also some polls up already. So the polls are you here to learn about podcasts specifically? Or are you interested in using other types of audio? And if it is other types of audio, please tell us in the chat what exactly that is that you're doing. And do you currently create audio? And there's options, yes, I already do, no, but I want to, and no, just interested. So we'd really like this to be as interactive as possible. Please speak up and tell us about who you are. Dominic, you've just gone off screen and left me alone here. Are you still here? Or is it just me? It might just be me. So the title of the session is obviously using audio effectively, and audio is a very broad thing. We're going to speak a little bit about what exactly podcasts are, because it's a really, really general term. We're going to speak a little bit about our guests, how Dominic has recently used audio and podcasting as part of his campaign around Operation Ark, which you may have seen in the news about Pen Farthing and his team and also his animals getting out of Afghanistan, as well as the Geronimo the alpaca situation. And Dominic, you're back. Hello.
Yeah, I've just got some session going on in my background in the ears. I'm just trying to see if I can actually switch it off. I don't know.
It sounds okay from our side, your audio at least.
Yeah, I've just got it going on in my ears, trying to see if I can...
A little bit of background noise or something.
Yeah, I can hear the rest of the sessions somewhere. I don't know, but I can hear you, but I've got someone else speaking in my ears.
Just me. Thank you for letting me know that.
Okay.
So when you're ready, do you want to give us a little bit about yourself and your background, Dominic?
Yes, I'm currently working for the Born Free Foundation, but I've got a long sort of career working in industry, civil service, plant science industries, food industries, before working in the environment and wildlife protection sector. From my background really is having worked in a career from early days in the civil service in agriculture and farming, then into food manufacturing, and then plant science, and then get more interested into global food production, the environment and wildlife conservation. The sort of whole issue comes together really with the work I do now on a range of issues, from bovine to TB, which relates to the culling of badgers, to what we're doing in relation to wildlife habitat protection here in Britain and abroad, and big debates about animal welfare and animal rights and the influence of politics in those decision-making processes in recent weeks, like Geronimo the alpaca, or what we've done with Operation Ark as well. So I'm probably now one of the sort of leading figures in that debate about our relationship with animals in the natural world, and how politics and business should deal with that really, and what their responsibilities are.
Fantastic. So as you've mentioned before, you've been in the middle of this huge Operation Ark campaign, as well as the Geronimo the alpaca situation. And what I found really interesting in the last couple of weeks is how you've used the platform of Off the Leash to really get the inside story out there in the wake of a lot of misinformation in the press, and as part of your campaign as well about these issues. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, I think, as I was saying to Charlie on the latest podcast of Operation Leash, we really wanted to use the podcast to draw in a new audience, to get involved in debating issues in more depth than what you get in mainstream media, which I think is, quite unique but important. And I think with both Geronimo, which became a massive media story on the back of social media, and then on to Operation Arc, that became even bigger to a degree with a combination of social and traditional broadcast print media coming together. It's been interesting how we can use the Off the Leash podcast to sort of look in more detail at the sort of storyline behind those events, my personal involvement, how other people have got involved, how that sort of public interest has sort of spurred politicians to action and has brought the media into something that they realize they can't really avoid. And if they do cover it, their ratings go up, their advertising, clicks on social media, audience figures go up, which is what the media is about. I think both the Geronimo and Operation Arc stories has shown that, animal issues, protection of animals are hugely of interest to the public, and that the mainstream media can't avoid them. In fact, it can be very good for them in terms of their readers or viewing figures if they do get behind those sorts of issues and concerns.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the most exciting things about podcasting for me, is that nobody needs to give you permission to do one, and nobody's telling you what to say and what you can't say. And that's much of the concept behind Off the Leash, isn't it? It's that you can talk emotively about things, you can talk brazenly about things, you can really say exactly what you mean about these issues. So, I mean, was that part of the reason that you decided to do Off the Leash and also call it Off the Leash?
Yeah, well, I've known Charlie for quite a long time. I think he's a wonderful broadcaster in many ways. And I was a bit concerned that some of this work wasn't getting a broad enough audience. And I was at a point in my career where, I'd stepped down as a chief executive of an animal charity, the Badger Trust, after 7 years. I've been CEO of a trade body before that in the plant science industry for another 5 years. I didn't want to go into a sort of leadership role again. I wanted to be able to take all the experience and knowledge I had just to sort of, do more policy communications campaign work at a broader level, bringing all that experience together. So I think I had a bit more sort of time on my hands to think about how I wanted to do that. And I was talking to Charlie, and we just thought, well, why don't we combine some of that skills and knowledge we have and those sort of abilities to communicate and the interests and passion we have and put it into a new podcast series. We called it Off the Leash because we just wanted it to be spontaneous, passionate. We wanted it to go to places where the charities wouldn't necessarily go, where we could really hold the politicians and businesses and other people to account and speak passionately, which I know lots of the people that we connect with every day want to hear that passion. And I think that's what the strength is in it. And also, is it being a hub, which Charlie's here with us now to explain. But I think the more that we create a network that people can plug into with their own campaigns, their own stories, the way that they can share their interest and passion, I think it becomes very, very powerful. And it's set against a background where mainstream media are giving less and less time to these issues. It's been a funny summer because Geronimo and Operation Arc became big media stories. But, that's not usual. We still struggle to a large degree to get the media to give enough scrutiny, enough debate and discussion to the sort of issues that we want to talk about. But the public care deeply about it, and increasingly politicians. I've just been on a podcast with Andrea Jenkins, a sort of a conservative MP, more on the right of the political party, who's really passionate about animal welfare and has even set her own podcast up on animal welfare issues. And I've been doing some stuff with her today on that front. So I think there is a genuine interest in politics, and they are receptive to what their constituents want to see on this. But I think Off the Leash has got a unique place in that now, and I'm looking forward to it building and growing in strength.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the most exciting things for me about podcasting, I think Charlie's still sorting out his mic, so I'll give my take on this in the meantime. Nope, we can't hear you, Charlie. So I'll give you a minute more on that. For me, it's how accessible podcasting is. So there's very low startup costs compared to other media, except it's more exclusive than social media, for example, where you can get drowned out really easily if you don't have followings like Dominic does, and people already there to retweet and like and see and share the content. It makes it a little bit more exclusive.
Am I here now?
Oh,
yes, we can hear you, Charlie.
Hello.
Wow. Browser issues in the real world.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think, before we bring Charlie in briefly, I think, podcasts do give a unique opportunity to go in depth in something. So, for example, the Operation Arc story was a very complex story. It took up like 2 or 3 weeks of my life, 24 hours a day, effectively. And to tell the story of every twist and turn in that took a long time. So, I think we did an excellent job working with Charlie for Off the Leash to sort of tell the inside story from my perspective here in London and Whitehall. And separately, Pen Farthing did another podcast on what was going on with regards to his experience in Kabul. Both of them were over an hour long. But if you sort of combine them together, you get a unique insight to what was happening on both ends of this story, which, I expect that could be made into a film or a book in the future. So I would have thought any scriptwriter would go to that as the story. And I think that's why it's so important that we're able to do this, so that you can actually look freshly at an issue and share your experiences and really go into a depth on it that you're just not going to get in a 3-minute piece on television or radio.
Thanks for that, Dominic.
Yeah.
Let's catch Charlie up. So, Charlie, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Well, apparently I'm incompetent with computers, which doesn't get a very good start to it, does it? No, I was just going to say there that I first met Dominic about 4 years ago through doing podcasts about the badger cull. And it was something he was saying then as well, that though he was getting airtime on radio and TV, he was only getting 5 or 6 minutes. Excuse me if I'm sort of going over something you've already just said. But the fact that we were able to sit down and have a proper conversation and really explore all of the details of the badger cull has kind of led on to the relationship we have now, where we were able to talk about Operation Arc. And I think we did it in a really successful way. And that's because we already had that working relationship together. My personal background is years ago, I don't know if anybody listening to this knows about the British Bird Fair. It's this huge event where hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bird watchers and stall holders all come together. There was a young startup company producing something called Bird Fair TV. They were going around to the stall holders, which may be travel agents and booksellers, and asking them for short advertorials. And because most of the stall holders didn't have any experience with audio, I was doing a blog at the time where I was working for an airline. I traveled abroad a lot. And they asked whether I might be interested in coming in as kind of like the warm-up act before they like have a comedian comes on before the main comedian. Well, I was just there to introduce just sort of talk, and I'd say, well, I've been there, let's talk about that. And on the second day, they said to me, you've got something of a radio voice there. Have you ever thought about doing podcasts? And I said, I've never heard of podcasts. What on earth are podcasts? And that's where it all started. So it was hardly I dived straight into podcasting and audio with this great drive and passion to do audio. But the more that I've done it, the more that I've seen the results it can achieve. I'm certainly very passionate about it now. I mean, very fortunate to have Lisa and Dominic as a sort of a team, a core team to put these things together. But that's my background. I got and plus a face for radio, of course, which makes it a lot easier to stay off the videos. So it's working really well. I'm really pleased that I'm probably doing this for about 7 or 8 years now, and I think Off the Leash finally, it sounds a bit of a cliche, but in a way it feels like home. This is what I've been wanting to do for a very long time.
Yeah.
And you touched on something really interesting that we've discussed a lot, which is what exactly is a podcast, because it's a really broad term and people think of quite formal, episodic things on iTunes or whatever, but they don't necessarily know how all-encompassing that is. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, I think the term podcast has changed completely now. It is basically any audio file that you can download. So if you go to the BBC and you listen to their news program, World at One, you'll be able to hear that as a podcast at 2:00. You can hear short podcasts. I mean, we have our own version of that, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So essentially now it is any sort of audio file. It certainly was in the old days. It used to be someone who had a passion. The old days, let's hark back 5 years. But it used to be people, particularly with a hobby or a particular passion or a particular interest, they would start up a little show, an audio show, where it would just be them often just talking about their passion for Star Trek or their passion for cars or their passion for whatever it was. And then they bring on their friends, and that turned into the interview format. And that's really where podcasting began to take off, particularly in the States. The vast majority of podcasting is still in the States. In the US, we kind of struggle over here. If you look at our hosts who host our podcast, 46% of their audience is from the US. In Britain, it's 6.8% of their entire output, and they have literally 20 million downloads every single week, or every single month, excuse me. So there is plenty of room for people who would like to join in with podcasting. It's still an empty stage in some ways. So please don't feel you have to stick to a certain format, or that it's a crowded field, because it really isn't. There's plenty of opportunities out there.
With that in mind, a question to both of you. Your tagline is environment, wildlife ethics. In fact, I got that wrong. Wildlife, environment, ethics.
And I know why.
Yes, exactly. So why podcasting for those issues? So the people who are here, I've just had a look at the poll results. So some people, about 23.5% of the people in the chat, already create audio.
Right.
Most of them, about 50%, don't, but they want to. Why do you think that this is a good platform for these topics in particular, to communicate with them?
Well, I'll speak firstly as perhaps the interviewer, and then you get the take from Dominic, who tends to be the interviewee, I would guess. But from the point of view of an interviewer, you have space. You have that time to talk, and that's what's really important to me. Yes, I go back and I edit very tightly, so an hour and a half conversation might be cut down to an hour. But that is still an awful lot of space. That is a lot more than you're going to get if you were to do that in a magazine article. Lots of these magazines or newspapers now have what they call the long read, but that would be the very, very long read. And I'm not someone who's comfortable with video, principally because of the editing. It's a very, very difficult to edit well, and you need much more kit to edit video well. But you can do it quite simply. Editing audio, and I feel more comfortable with audio. You can do different things with it. It's aimed at a different audience. So I'm sure there's a huge crossover, but there are people who particularly like audio. They can carry on with their lives while they, I hate the word consume, but that tends to be the way it's talked about, consume audio. So for me, it works extremely well. And I don't have the speed of thought that Dominic does, so I'm able to go back in and do things to the podcast that I probably couldn't do if I was on video. Beg pardon.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is that podcasts really fit into sort of the modern life and how we want to digest media a lot of the time, especially younger generations who are quite hard to reach with these topics in particular. They can listen to it while they're cooking dinner or on the bus or whatever, but they're still engaging with that. They're still taking it in. And I think it's a really good way to reach them in that way. And also it's free. That's a really, really big selling point, is you can listen to this for free. You don't need to pay a subscription. You don't need to pay a one-off fee or anything like that. This content is out there for you if you want to find it.
Yeah.
Dominic, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's got huge potential for growth, because I think a lot of people actually, even I think we've had the biggest audience for Operation Arc podcasts we put on the OTL website. And a lot of people that listens into that have never listened to a podcast before. Yeah. But they wanted to have the insight on a story they'd followed closely for weeks. And they wanted to find it all in one place. So when they've listened to it, I think they really like the concept, and they're now coming back for more. And I think that's the challenge, podcasts are very alien to a lot of people. In some way, it's been more difficult in lockdown because people aren't commuting. I think our traffic would be probably higher if more people are on trains and they'd just be listening to this. They'd have that dead time, they'd be using it. They're not, because they're working from home, and their work-life balance is somewhat different. So it'll be interesting to see how this sort of plays out. If people do start returning to work for a few days a week, I could see traffic beginning to rise. if more of us are stuck on aeroplanes again, this type of material to be digested is there. But having said that, I think it's an exciting time to be doing it, because you're opening up new horizons. It's giving people like me and Charlie and our guests just an opportunity to speak and explore issues in much more depth. I'm fortunate. I get on mainstream media a lot, but you'll get more than 10 minutes. In many cases, you might get 3, 4, 5 minutes. You can't do any justice to an issue like that. The best you can do is throw in a few sound bites and get a bit of emotion going, depending on what your arguments are, and then away you go. But the podcasts, they're different. They're there for contemplation, thinking, stimulating debate and thought, and I think can be really good. I think the other thing we started to see is they can be really good for campaign events, like Charlie, when he came to the Geronimo Badger Coal protest DEFRA last week, did an excellent job of edited down speeches, into a sort of 30-minute podcast where he caught all the key messages, and that's gone down well. I think that type of thing could really grow. So getting out and about, capturing that live content, and sort of putting it into a podcast for people to listen to afterwards who weren't there, or even those who just want to go back over the day and just experience it again and share it. I think it's really good. So I think that what we've got here is really important. But Charlie's got great experience and knowledge of bringing it together, and Lisa, you've been helping recently as well, no end. And I think bringing that passion and interest is fascinating. And I hope that audience will move beyond Britain to continental Europe, North America, and other places, because the issues we're talking about are global as well as being national in that sense as well.
That brings me nicely back to, I started talking a bit about accessibility, and we've said, it's really easy, it's free, it's all of these great things. But there's still a lot of work that goes into it. You have to build a website and the social media following, and if you're not fortunate to already have that, as we've mentioned, they're not really hard to build. And that brings me on to talking about our shortcasts and what we're doing with that, which is something I'm really, really excited about. And these are our opportunities to pass the mic a little bit and share our platform. So Charlie, can you tell me a bit more about the shortcast?
The shortcast is essentially this portmanteau word, I can't remember if that's right, but it's essentially short podcasts. As I said earlier, a podcast can be anything, and they can be 2 minutes long, they can be 5 minutes long, they can be 7 or 8 minutes long. And what we wanted to, or what we are doing with the shortcasts, they're not interviews, they're not live, they're just they are available to anybody who wants to flag up perhaps an event they're doing, or they just want to let off steam, And you can do that on your own, of course you can. But if you don't have a platform and you don't have an audience, then sometimes it feels like you're kind of shouting into the dark. And what we wanted to do was use the platform that we are establishing as a place where people can come, kind of like a community shout out board, if you like. And you don't need to be greatly skilled to do it. That's the great thing about the whole concept that we're trying to put forward, is if you have a mobile phone and you have something to say, then we can help you say it. And, we're determined we won't ever charge for this. I can edit I can edit a 5-minute shortcast in the time that it's taken to say this, because I've done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. I know exactly how I want them to sound. There's only a few things you tend to use in editing, and that's cutting out the stumbles. That's perhaps if there's a bit of background noise, you might take that out. There's the odd stray sentiment you might be aware of that you think, really, not sure you meant to say that, so we'll get back in contact with you and just check whether that's what you want. But essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to give you a platform, and we bring in audiences from lots of different organizations, individuals and charities, and we're trying to create almost like a rabbit hole that you can dive down into, and there'll be shortcasts from charities you know about, shortcasts from events you know about, but there'll be lots that you don't know about. So we're pooling all the audiences. That's why we hope it's attractive to the charities and organizations and everyone else we're trying to reach out. Because if it's just us saying, well, you come and talk to your audience via us, that's not such an attractive proposition. But if we can say we are bringing this audience from everywhere, talk to them, then there's a good chance you'll pick up people coming to your event. You'll pick up fans, supporters, members, whatever it is. So we're trying to make it as open and accessible as absolutely possible. And we think the shortcast is the way to do that. And we put up 2 little shortcasts about shortcasts, which explains how to do them. And I think they're 5 minutes long each so far. And I thought they've been listened to about 200 times already, and that's in the first couple of weeks. So, and it's an idea that's a little bit alien. We're still having to persuade people that there's a point in doing this. But if you're prepared to spend a few minutes thinking about what you want to say, and then a few minutes recording it, hand it to us. We'll do all the editing. We'll do all the hosting. We'll do the promotion for you. So essentially, that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to help people, which sounds a bit of a cliche, but that is what we're trying to do. Help get that message out there.
Absolutely. When you first told me about this, I felt like there must be a catch. Even being from the inside, there must be a catch. There's not a catch. We're trying to genuinely do this because we're all campaigners and we all care about these issues.
Exactly.
And that sounds quite hard to believe, I think, sometimes, but still. So that's how we're trying to share our platform. What if people want to create their own? What if people want to create their own podcast? Charlie, can you tell me a bit about what you need to think about getting started? And especially lots of questions I get are about, we've said, oh, all you need is your phone. But what do people need if they're doing their own? And it's not just sending us a recording. I know that you use Audacity, which is a free
editing software. Yeah, that's extremely easy to use. You just go to audacity.com, and it's still being updated. I don't think the people who put that together are going to do any major revisions now, but you can go to audacity.com, download it for free. It's like everything else. The first time you turn on a new computer or even a new phone, you're thinking, God, I'll never learn how to do all of this. But within a few weeks, it's absolutely second nature. And that is very easy to use. And it's a fantastic bit of kit. And again, because it's not video, you're just tweaking audio. Mm-hmm. But I would say, if you're going to start a podcast, I get asked this so many times, what do I need? Above all, you need passion about what you do. And it's such an overused word, but people can tell immediately you listen to something if it's not authentic, if it hasn't got that passion behind it that makes you want to listen. You don't have to be the great expert. You can get the experts on, and I'm really lucky. That's how I got to meet you guys. You don't need that. What you need is a real passion, and don't underestimate the fact that it is actually quite hard work. You can spend an hour recording, but you can spend 8 hours editing it to make it. If you're a bit OCD like I am, I am very fussy. Very fussy.
Sounds about right. And actually, there's a question for us, which is, what audio software do you think is a good start point? So we've answered that.
Yeah, definitely Audacity. Very, very simple.
And do they require lots of editing to be appealing to listen to? And what I would say to that is, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and many of them started off recording on their laptops under their duvet in their room. If you have something good to say, it doesn't matter about that in the beginning. Yes, there'll be a learning curve and you'll get better at those things. I certainly made mistakes at the start of doing this as well, despite being a video maker and having that background. Yeah. But what you have to say is more important than that technical finesse in the first place. Like, I know Charlie will definitely help you with Mike, but you have a phone in your pocket and you probably have a laptop you're watching on right now. So those things are enough to get started. And then you have free platforms like Audacity. We're not sponsored. We keep saying their name as if we are. I wish.
No, we're not. No, but we needn't be anyway, because it's free software.
Exactly.
So
and there's also
they don't need to advertise it. The one thing I would say, though, just as well, don't get disheartened if you don't get a huge audience to begin with. You need to be doing this because you really want to. Do it for yourself to begin with, because you will not get a huge audience. I've been talking about the hosting platform that we use, Buzzsprout. Their median podcast download is 28 per episode. If you go in expecting you're going to get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of listeners in the first few weeks, I mean, you might. Fantastic. And if you do, please email them and tell us how you did it. But it takes time, and you need to be certain that you're doing this because it's something you really want to do. And to hell with how many people you've got listening. That's not what's important at first.
We've got a couple of other questions as well. One is, where do you host and distribute your podcast? We're obviously on the same wavelength with the chat, which is great. Do any particular platform stand out? So yeah, we use Buzzsprout. It's super easy to use, and I would recommend it thoroughly. There are competitors to that.
There are lots and lots of platforms, yeah.
I think Buzzsprout is very common. And we've got another question. Is it better to start with a rough script if you aren't that confident at getting a good first try? Or will that take the energy out of it and feel over-rehearsed? And I'm very interested to ask you both this topic because I know you have different takes on it. Dominic, you are a very good communicator. Even off the cuff, you come out with answers that I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, I tend to not prepare much. I have thoughts in my mind. It might be an issue that I'm annoyed about, so I want to bring that up. But Charlie does bring some structure to it. And that helps, because otherwise it would just go all over the place to a degree. So we agree, there are one or two key themes. Are they going to link some of these together? Is there a campaign event we want to draw attention to? Or do we, because we've developed it now, so we're in a place where we can do a unique one-off episode, like for the art project, which we thought needed to be done, which has been very successful. Equally, we've done this week looking at the media impact of Operation Arc and Geronimo, and how the social media and conventional media came together. And I think that's really interesting. And we've caught some really good stuff in there. And that's getting a good few downloads now. And I think that'll grow. It's a good piece of work. As I said, Charlie's been getting out more, in events we've been doing, with badger groups like the one you came to in Oxfordshire recently, which I thought was a good chance just to sort of reconnect with wildlife, people in the field, as it were. And then protests like we saw at DEFRA the other week about Geronimo, just getting back to what makes people, express themselves in that way, with the media sort of picking up on it. So I think, you can overscript. I think you've got to sort of have that enthusiasm. I think if you've got like a few people that can regularly come together, because what we wanted to do was have that sort of discussion forum once a week where we'd capture the sort of key issues that were going on in the news, discuss them, debate them, and sort of open it up for other people. And they'll come back and go, I like that. What are they talking about this week? Or they're talking about an issue I care about, or I've been involved in that. So I think that works. But now and again, you might want to tailor it, as I said, to a special sort of one-off, or even we've taken a break for a few weeks because it can be quite intensive. You're thinking, actually, we're doing this every week, and this is quite hard going from an editing point of view, but also from a content point of view. So taking a break in a cycle, I think, is really quite useful. But you're building up a loyal audience, and that takes time. And there are steps on the way. You're not going to get an audience immediately. You've got to earn it. They've got to tell people that I've listened to it. Please listen to this. I think what Charlie's done with your help, Lisa, in sort of shorter podcast bits, guest sections, a sort of plethora of, places you can drop in to get all the updates is really good. So if you come to the Off the Leash website now, there's a huge amount of great material, and it's building into a wonderful archive of what's going on in the environment, animal welfare, conservation in Britain, which I think is quite unique in that sense. And some of the guest appearances, NGOs, campaign groups we're getting coming to us, and I think that's going to increase. So yeah, you've got to start, and it takes time to build it, but we're making good progress, and I'd recommend anyone who's passionate should consider doing the same.
Yeah, I have to say I script a lot. I research everything. I think if you're going to get into podcasting, it is worth being honest with yourself about what you are. I am not the front person. I'm quite happy to be almost the feed sometimes. I don't have that speed of thought. I mean, I don't. I've come to around after years of realizing that I'm not the off the cuff specialist. I need the notes, and I'm quite happy to revisit some of the audio that I've laid down and redo it. And perhaps I'm giving away trade secrets here, but that's the way that I work. And if you can tell that I've done that, then I haven't done a good job. Normally, you can, if you end a podcast and you think, I wish I'd said that differently. If you go back and the conditions are the same, and your scratchy voice is the same, you can edit things in. I mean, you would not watch a TV program or a movie and watch an unedited version, because it sounds terrible. We have a different way of working, but that's great. I think that's what makes us so effective as a team. So yeah, if you feel you need to script it, do that, practice it, and you will get the hang of reading things out that sound natural enough. You will. If you want to just leap in and go gung-ho and you discover you've got this amazing skill, fantastic. That's great. I don't have it. I'm perfectly honest about that.
I'm a bit more along the lines of Charlie. For example, I scripted this session and that went out of the window in the first 5 minutes. So, you have to be prepared to just move with the conversation and accept the curveballs, and in this case, technical issues, which will very often be. And we've got a couple more questions along these lines actually as well. And another thing I was going to say is, remember that our style of podcast is just one of many, many styles. So last year I was at Communicate talking to James Cook, and he did Forest 404, which is a really creative drama that still has conservation issues in it. Or you have ones that are more like, it's not in the same space, but drunk history, where people just get drunk and talk about history and go completely off script. So there's a lot of different types of podcast, and there's no rules to how you do them. We have a few questions that I can quickly answer. So how often do you think you should release a podcast to keep engagement, or is it subject dependent? And the answer to that is weekly is best, and having a schedule is best. But I release Crimes Against Nature monthly, if that, because I'm busy and that's all I can fit into my life, and it takes a lot of work to do that. So, these things are flexible as long as you keep engaging with your audience. Is it worth making a few in advance to have in the bag before you launch? Absolutely. Absolutely do that. I mean, it's a bit different with Off the Leash because it's topicals and they're doing it each week. But for me, that was really, really important, and I would recommend it. And building on the idea of scripted and unscripted, if you have guests on, do you find it better to give them some idea of what you might be talking about and asking ahead of time so they can prepare? And I would say yes, but not too much, because then they'll script themselves and then they'll respond to you in a way that isn't natural. They over prepare for it, and that's not what you want. You want to be able to have a conversation and dialogue that feels natural to the listener.
Could I just add to that quickly? I don't like to prepare questions. People often say to me, what are you going to ask me in advance? I like to prepare a list of points that I know I want to cover. But I don't like asking questions because they tend to be closed. Not many people are good at asking very open questions. And if you just say, these are the points I'm going to cover in this podcast, and I send it to them, and that has worked extremely well for me so far, I hope.
We've got
the age groups. I see a question there. Are we all more talking about adult? It's difficult. I don't know. We haven't really looked at the demographics. I think probably most of our audience are of a certain age. I'm sure we do have some young listeners. Is it a challenge? Well, they're probably listening to music more download, but maybe less discussion and chat. I don't know. I would have thought maybe university students are more open to this. But I do think we might need to think, how do a young audience sort of digest this type of material? But I would have thought, bearing in mind they spend so much more time online, that actually the podcast sort of market for digesting this rather than reading newspapers and things is probably larger for young people. It's just that we need to think about, how do you communicate? You know, could I see a podcast series in the natural world by young people for young people? Yeah, most definitely. If it's not happening, then someone should be doing it, because I think that could really reach.
Looking at the chats, yeah. So Kaylee has actually shared Eastside Community Trust's project, Freedom My Kids podcast. So go check that out if children's content is really what you're looking for. Thank you, Stacey and Claire, for also sharing your tips in the chat.
And also maybe promotion, because I think a lot of people say, how do you promote your podcast? Now, I'm fortunate, I've got quite a big social media presence, so I can sort of shove stuff over and say you should listen. That can drive it, and we've seen that in recent weeks. That can be quite effective. But you know, you've got to be able to sort of push something that people think is worth listening to and wants to share it. And people are digesting things in a very different way. So I do like a lot of 2-minute video messages on my phone that get quite significant audiences. At the height of the Operation Arc sort of campaign, they were getting nearly 500,000 views, and they were sort of getting a lot of mileage. But if you sort of then use that video message to introduce an issue, and then sort of say, we've got a podcast on this, and there's a link underneath, listen this week, that can also then drive more traffic. So you're sort of capturing something that people can quickly digest on their phone, but then actually hoping that they'll take a bit of a longer dip in for a podcast. So you're trying to catch them in different ways. And I think that can be that. I know we've been looking at Instagram more for promoting, which is an interesting one. And obviously, you know, Facebook and LinkedIn. LinkedIn actually is becoming more useful, I think, as a sort of networking and sharing platform on campaign activities. I find quite a lot of what I post on there gets quite big audiences now, including links to podcasts, interviews, just press stuff and things like that we do. So, you know, think about all these different ways in which you can promote it without any cost, really. You know, these are just social media platforms we can all set up and push stuff out, which is important.
I think those are some really good tips for you. And we've also got a couple more people sharing content in the chat. Please go have a look at that. We're very happy for you to do that. Also, if you want to speak to us more about anything that we've been discussing, please give us a direct message. We're really, really happy to talk about this and see if we can help you as well. So we're on Twitter at OTL Podcasts. We're on Instagram at OTL Pods. We'll also be taking part in a fireside chat at 3 p.m. It should be titled Off the Leash Podcast or something along that, so you can find us. And we're happy to come along. You can put your video on. You can chat with us directly, and we can speak about what you're doing and if there's any way we can help. Also, a shortcast. If you think you've got a shortcast for us, please get in touch. We have a couple of minutes. Anybody want to close us out with some final thoughts and comments on how we want Off the Leash to grow?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I'm really dreaming big with Off the Leash. I've tried different iterations of this, and I think I would like us to be the audio equivalent of opening up the Guardian app every morning on your phone. You know, so there is just a lot of stuff there. I would like us to be an audio a default where charities put out a text press release, but they also think, oh, we should do something for Off the Leash as well. I would like us to be the first port of call with the really big interviews, and maybe with 3 of us, that's not possible yet. But we've only been going 4 months, really, when you think about it, and we're building a sizable thing. We're here today, which is an incredible thing. And I think between us, we certainly have the potential and the passion to become to properly be able to talk about being an audio platform. That's where I would like us to be.
Fantastic. Anything to add, Dominic?
Yeah, I think to me, it's almost become an extension of my work. So it doesn't matter what I'm doing in the mainstream media or campaign, sort of lobbying, political stuff. it all comes back to how we can share this and expand that audience through Off the Leash every week. And I think those two sides are coming together very well. Where we can sort of do more in-depth focus pieces that we can't do in the mainstream media, whether it's a significant target audience and interest, like we found with Operation Ark and Geronimo, where I think Charlie's right. I'd like to break more sort of news stories within the sort of Off the Leash network, so that we can sort of push the barriers, because I find that a lot of what I do on social media sets the pace for the rest of the media, picks up on it. So I think we should be doing the same with Off the Leash. It should be a way in which we're prompting others. So I'd like journalists to increasingly think, well, if I follow Dominic Dyer, I need to follow what he's doing on Off the Leash with Charlie Morse as well, because that's where we're going to pick up some really interesting stuff that could feed into articles and stuff that we must do. I think potential's huge. I think it's becoming a valuable hub. It's exciting. We're creative. I think it energizes us to keep going. I can't imagine now not having it, which is interesting after a few months. Because I think we'd really miss it. Because I think we'd really miss it, the opportunity for that in-depth type discussion. I get frustrated by the short attention span of the media and the sound. I can do all that and I can be very effective in it, as I've been in the last few weeks, but it's not enough, because anyone only gets a little snippet of what's going on. So we've got to try and bring it back and tell people for the history books, really, what's going on here, what was behind all of this. And I think Off the Leash is great for that. And I hope that's what it'll go from strength to strength.
Perfect. And speaking of which, that is more than our time by a couple of minutes there. So thank you so much, anybody who's still here, for joining us. We really appreciated how many people have joined in the chat and things like this. So yes, thank you very much. And please find us on social media or see you at the Fireside Chat.
Yeah, come and listen.
Thank you for listening, and apologies for being late.
Well, that's all. There you go.
Right, bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.